Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Friday, November 1st, 2024. This is the Excerpt. Today, how officials are preparing for possible violence ahead of Tuesday. Plus, we take a look at some of the latest polling and how crucial is the college vote in this year's election. Ahead of Election Day, officials are preparing for protests and possible violence. I spoke with USA Today's senior national political correspondent, Sarah D. Wire, for more. Sarah, thanks for hopping on today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Sarah, how have threats against election workers really grown more violent? What are some of the things we've been seeing?
We've seen this especially over the last 4 years. There are threats to election offices. In the last few months, we've seen offices receive white powder in the mail. We've seen videos on social media or arrests happen because people appear at the polls and punch out a poll worker because they're told they have to take their hat off because it has a Trump sign on it. We've also seen that a lot of election offices have been really preparing for this because poll workers have been worried to work the polls this year after hearing about all of these threats.
Yeah, so as you say, officials are preparing for threats of violence, for general protests, for all kinds of things ahead of Tuesday. And it's clear, Sarah, that a focal point is on central ballot counting locations. What's the importance of keeping those locations safe, and how are officials preparing?
Most people probably have no idea what a central balloting location is, and there's no reason that they should. This is an important part of the routine of counting our ballots, but it's not something that is widely known. So this is the location where ballots are going to be physically placed on election night. And so as poll workers or election workers are going through and counting vote by mail and absentee ballots and doing all the processing, that's where they're going to be physically stored. And so it's so important to protect those locations because these ballots can't be reproduced. They're going to be separated from the envelope that includes the voter's name, and then the physical ballot is going to be run through a machine. And once those things have been separated, they can't be put back together. It can't be replicated by going back and contacting those same voters.
Sarah, the day after the 2020 election, some Republicans went to the convention hall in Detroit where mail-in and military votes were being counted. And, they argued with police and with election officials. They chanted, "Stop the count." That's just one example of some of the craziness after the 2020 election that we saw, and even into 2021. What lessons are officials really taking from that election?
You're going to see a lot more police presence than perhaps we have in the past. I spoke to a lot of law enforcement for this article who said that they had never really played a role in this process before. They might know when election day is, where the polling locations are, but now they expect to be present at a lot of the polling locations. They are going to be escorting the ballots through the city to get to the central balloting location. They're going to be at every entrance and exit. They're going to be manning the magnetometers as people enter the buildings to make sure that there are no weapons. When I was speaking to the elections director in Detroit, he said back when he started in the mid-'80s, he was the security. He was a 19-year-old kid sitting at the front door asking people to write their name down. That's no longer the reality in election offices anymore.
Great breakdown and a great story here. Sarah D. Wire covers national politics for USA Today. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
In the final days before Tuesday, Republican Donald Trump and Democrat Kamala Harris remain in a razor-thin race to claim up-for-grabs swing states that could solidify an electoral college victory, according to new polls released by UMass Lowell YouGov. In a new poll out yesterday, Trump leads Harris by 2 percentage points in North Carolina, while Harris holds a 4-point lead over Trump in Michigan. The poll, meanwhile, showed Harris with a slim 1 percentage point lead over Trump in the key state of Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, new polls released by Echelon Insights yesterday showed the candidates tied in Michigan and Wisconsin, with Trump ahead in Pennsylvania. You can dig deeper into some of these latest race poll findings with a link in today's show notes. Getting out the college vote is more important and complicated than ever. I spoke with USA Today education reporter Zach Schermele to learn more. Hello, Zach.
Hey, Taylor. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for hopping on, Zach. So just starting with this, how reliable have college-age voters really been historically, and how important have they been to election success?
So, college age voters have really been considered less dependable than other types of voting blocks. I mean, think about it. There are lots of elements of a young person's life that could keep them from voting, right? They have often hectic schedules, and they're usually not as familiar as older adults are with how voting works. Those facts of life, along with a lot of the data, have for a long time demonstrated that young voters just aren't as dependable. I should note too that it's important that we distinguish here between college voters and college age voters. So think folks in the 18 to 29-year-old range. They're two different groups, and young voters who aren't in college are the ones that are less likely to vote. College enrollment and education can actually be more of a predictor of voting likelihood. But as far as how important young Americans are to winning campaigns, they're super important. I mean, according to the top higher ed lobby, young Americans will compose nearly a fifth of the electorate this election cycle.
Wow. So then, what have we seen really in recent years, Zach, seeming to indicate that this voting bloc is becoming more reliable, kind of bucking some of those historical trends?
Yes, like I said, college age voters aren't typically as reliable. But in 2020, after the onset of the pandemic and on the heels of a nationwide racial reckoning, when George Floyd's murder prompted a lot of protests among young folks, half of the 18 to 29-year-old voting population turned out, marking what another Tufts research report called likely one of the highest rates of youth electoral participation since the voting age was lowered to 18. The 2020 student turnout rate they calculated was 66%. And that was based on data from more than 1,000 colleges and nearly 9 million students. That turnout rate kind of dipped in 2022 during the midterms, but young voters still helped to sway key races.
Zach, there are some complications that can get in the way when it comes to college students voting. What barriers does this group often face?
In 1998, Congress almost unanimously passed legislation that was signed by Bill Clinton requiring colleges to do more to help students vote. This is something, Taylor, that I think kind of gets lost in this conversation, that it's not just that colleges should be helping students to vote. They, in fact, are required to do it in order to remain compliant with federal law. They have to make a good faith effort to distribute voter registration forms. But in recent years, many states have enacted more restrictive voting measures that have had implications for the degree to which students have the ability to access their ballots. North Carolina is a good example. The state's legislature there passed a law requiring North Carolinians to show physical ID cards to vote. Now, that law was put on hold for several years until Republicans on the state Supreme Court allowed it to proceed in 2023. The measure, though, prompted a lot of confusion across college campuses in October after the North Carolina Board of Elections ruled in a case involving UNC that said that digital cards were not going to meet the law standards. And so students told me there that they ended up really frustrated with what they called an 11th hour change.
So Tuesday's almost here, Zach. How are the Harris and Trump campaigns approaching this voting block in the final stretch of this election? And younger voters do tend to be left leaning, as you outline in this piece, Zach. So, what does that mean for Kamala Harris? Can she count on their vote this year? I know that there are some new wrinkles this time around.
Yeah, when you think about the brat summer kind of outreach from the Harris campaign, that's an indication that they know that younger voters are important to them. And also the Trump campaign's return to more mainstream social media. Both are clear signs that the campaigns are trying to shore up their online strategies, which can certainly be interpreted as appeals to younger voters. And yes, younger voters do tend to be more left leaning, but some college students have allied themselves with the so called uncommitted movement, which dealt a small but really not insignificant blow to President Joe Biden's primary victory. Polls taken before Vice President Kamala Harris entered the race showed that Democrats were staring down kind of a worrisome enthusiasm gap from young folks. But that seems to have changed since Harris took over. It's going to be interesting to see what turnout looks like this year. But as one 20-year-old voter told me, when Gen Z turned 18, they began to buck youth voter trends, and Gen Z is still showing up to vote against all the odds.
All right, Zach Schermele covers education for USA Today with a great breakdown for us, as always. I thank you, Zach.
Thank you, Taylor.
The manhunt for a suspect in arson fires targeting ballot boxes in the Pacific Northwest continued yesterday as details emerged about a suspect and a possible motive amid concerns that more boxes will burn. In Oregon, Portland Police Agency spokesperson Mike Benner said the suspect is believed to have a wealth of experience in metal fabrication and welding. Benner, speaking at a briefing Wednesday, described him as a white male 30 to 40 years old with short hair or balding, a thin to medium build, and thin face. Portland police said they responded to reports of a fire at a ballot box earlier this week. Police in neighboring Vancouver, Washington responded to an arson at a ballot box about 30 minutes later. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. We're produced by Shannon Ray Green and Kaylee Monahan, and our executive producer is Laura Beatty. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, and I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.